The Minecraft community has long been split over the controversial combat changes released 5 years ago. In this video, the third episode of my multi-part series on the future of Minecraft combat, I outline a solution to the problem. First, here are the key points I made in the second episode in case you haven't watched it yet. 1. The 1.8 PvP community was incredibly dissatisfied with the 1.9 combat changes. 2. Therefore, and for other reasons, adding a game rule that could switch between 1.8, 1.16 and the new combat that Jeb is developing with the help of the Minecraft community on Reddit would solve a large part of the problem. Then I outlined how I would implement the game rule, since previous suggestions have not been good enough. First, new PvP should be an option in the game rule alongside 1.8 and 1.16. 2. When switching systems, everything would need to be reverted, rather than only specific mechanics like attack cooldown. I.e., the system I was proposing was not a conventional game rule, due to its increased complexity and difficulty to implement. After all this, you're probably left wondering, why? What's the point of this? Why do we even need to implement it? Well, let me answer those questions. So I've talked about how I would implement the combat switching game rule, but I haven't answered some obvious questions. What's the point of it? Who does it satisfy? The thing is, different players prefer different systems. There's a reason Hypixel, the largest Java Edition server that averages about 135,000 concurrent players at any one time, still uses 1.8.9, a version of the game released 5 years ago. Would they switch to a new version, considering they'd have to recode all their plugins for latest version? I don't know, but more importantly, having this option would satisfy the very left behind 1.8 PvP community and the otherwise soon to be left behind 1.16 PvP community. Personally, I like both 1.8 and 1.16 combat, and I like the direction the new system is taking. Above all, I value choice. Therefore, having all three systems available to use without losing features seemed like an optimal solution. So why has Mojang rejected this idea? What is so fundamentally wrong with it that they said they'd never engineer it? On the surface, adding a game rule seems to fix any issues. The 1.8 community would finally be happy because they'd have access to all the new features released over the last several years. The 1.16 community would remain happy because they'd still have access to all these features without switching to new combat mechanics they didn't like. And any new community created from the new default combat system would have no reason to be unhappy. But Mojang seemed very reluctant to do this, and, as shown by Jeb's earlier tweet and this post, has outright rejected it. Let's read what Jeb has to say here. 1. It's hard to add to the code. I don't think this is a valid argument. It's not like you're inventing a new system, you're coding in a system where all values for weapon damages, armor protections, enchantments, and potions, etc. are already known. Mojang is adding complex new features all the time in new updates, so they clearly have the resources to do this. I think it's more the case that Jeb thinks employees' time is better spent elsewhere, like coding new content in updates. 2. Jeb says the problem is, a game rule will split the player base, and that as older players leave the game, there'd be less new players to fill servers. This is a more complex point. Jeb's essentially saying that, if the game rule were implemented, the player base would be split between 1.8 and 1.16 combat. This would mean that, as the older players, many of whom do use 1.8 combat, leave the game, the newer players, who mostly use 1.16, would be less likely to play on servers that used 1.8 combat due to its lack of familiarity. However, I don't think this point stands either, because new players already go on Hypixel. A lot of them. And Hypixel not only uses 1.8 combat, but the actual 1.8.9 version, with its lack of modern Minecraft features and all. If the most popular Java Edition server, by a long margin, uses 1.8.9, then I don't think this game rule would cause new players to not play on it. On the contrary, this would make 1.8 servers more popular, due to the sudden influx of new features released over the last 5 years, like actually swimming in water, released in 1.13, rather than walking incredibly slowly, which is just so painful. When reading many forum posts, of course there's the toxicity, and the lack of understanding the 1.8 PvP community. But what's often underlying is the assumption that the player base should have no say in the development of the game, and that everything's secondary to the developers, vision. But is this really true? Should players have little to no say in how a game they play develops? If so, why should their opinions be less important than what the developers want? If not, how should their voices be heard? How much choice should the player be granted? This is the core of the issue. You may have noticed that there are two subtly different things I'm talking about. One is how much choice the players should have versus the developers in the game's development. The other is how much choice the developers should grant the players when actually playing the game. Take this exact situation. Jeb's been very good at the first, reaching out to real players on Reddit and taking the time to seriously consider what they have to say about Minecraft combat, but he's been far weaker on the second. He said that the combat system they come up with will replace all existing systems on all platforms for the foreseeable future. Under this vision, there'd be no flexibility to change systems on the latest version of the game. It's a deliberate removal of choice from the player. Yes, you can still play on earlier versions, but 1, Bedrock players can't do that, and 2, obviously then you don't gain access to cool new features and updates, which is not great. A lot of the time, especially in mobile games, the player is not granted much choice. They're told, this is how you play the game, and the rules are inflexible and unchanging. Take Flappy Bird, for a basic example. The rules are, you tap to flap, and if you hit the pipe, you lose. That's it. No flexibility, no choice. But that's fine, because no one cares whether Flappy Bird is a masterpiece that offers users unparalleled choice. All they want is a dirt simple game, so the developer doesn't need to worry about this issue. You know the name for a game in which the player is granted unparalleled choice? A sandbox. You know what type of game Minecraft is? A sandbox. You know what one of the best things about Minecraft is? It's unparalleled choice. And what does restricting the combat system you use do? It removes choice. Minecraft is not a game whose players want to be told what to do, to be handed a system and told, that's all. No. In fact, the opposite is true. Why do you think mods exist? Why do plugins exist? Heck, why do game rules exist? They're all to give the player more choice. In fact, Minecraft Bedrock itself greatly restricts choice, partly because Microsoft wanted to make more money with microtransactions by hiding skins, resource packs, and data packs behind paywalls. But that's a whole separate video. My point is, the players should be granted the choice of what combat systems to use. They should be allowed to decide how to play the game themselves. Because, especially for Minecraft of all games, having more choice is better. And on top of that, the already unhappy 1.8 PvP community, the large number of the players who really liked 1.16 combat, the fact that the largest Java Edition server, with 100,000 concurrent players, uses a version of the game 6 years old just to keep 1.8 combat. And the case for the combat switching game rule becomes very compelling. It doesn't even make the game more complex for newbies, because how many new players look at game rules anyway? But that's enough from me now. Let's read Reddit user I'mScripted's response to what Jeb has to say here. It completely ties into what I'm saying, and in fact was the inspiration for this train of thought. So thank you, I'mScripted. AntVenom's recent video definitely makes me question how much of that is true. They were able to make a mod that added the game rule in a few hours at best. Obviously, that's likely to be some things were done incorrectly that could introduce some bugs, but that really puts it into perspective that this is by no means an impossible task, let alone a hard one. I've quit the game 1.8, but there's one key thing I feel Mojang has started to ignore: control. The player should be in control. Yes, you guys are the devs of the game, but the players are those who build servers with a large player base or build a map that's iconic to the game. That's what people enjoy. Single player is, in all honesty, much lower on that list. The boss bars are a good example of you guys realizing the importance of giving us that control, and I do hope that continues. The 1.9 update locked players to your predefined value. Changing them broke animations. They go on to say some other stuff here that I won't read. You can look at it yourself if you want to. Now, further down it says, due to the combat update, there are now two sides, those who like it and those who don't. You now need to cater for both audiences to avoid anything like 1.9, so I urge you to consider a method like the new custom crafting, where you can define attack damage, multipliers and cooldowns and other options all in one file on connection to a world. With certain settings, you should be able to get a 1.7 experience. Also bring back Thor blocking even if it does nothing. Such a change would not split the player base, that has already occurred. This kind of change would only bring more control to servers and map creators. Take a lesson from our success and let the player be in control. Honestly, I think that idea of allowing players to create whatever combat system they want with a file is a great one. I don't see Mojang ever doing this, but I'd really want them to. But if they don't do that, I think at least they could implement the combat switching game rule between 1.16, 1.8 and new combat, like I've been arguing for this video. Right, so for the conclusion, it's a rapid fire round. I'm going to list off all the reasons as to why Mojang wouldn't want to implement the combat switching game rule, and then give a counter argument as to why they should. Community. Most of the community doesn't actually want it. A large part of the community passionately wants this. Ever heard of Hypixel? Ever heard of Minecraft YouTubers who play on Hypixel and collectively get billions of views? 2. Toxicity. Suck it up, spam clicker. Do I even need to answer this? 3. Choice. Ultimately, developers shouldn't need to listen to players to decide what direction the game goes. If they want to do something, players need to adapt to the changes because their opinions don't matter. This is just a less toxic version of the previous one. 4. Another one on choice. We don't need even more choice in Minecraft. There's already enough as it is. I've already covered this extensively. Minecraft's sandbox and the combination of choice and simplicity make up its heart. If a large chunk of players really want more choice, and it's not prohibitively difficult to develop this choice, then it should be developed. 5. Difficulty. It would be too difficult for Mojang to code this. No, it wouldn't. Think about how much work Mojang puts in every time they create a new update. This would be a fraction of the work, as rather than creating whole new features, they just have to forward port 1.8 to latest version. 1.16 is already the current latest version, so no extra work would be needed in forward porting 1.16. It's a far easier task than, say, creating 1.17. 6. Value. Considering how much time it would take Mojang to code this, it would be better for them to focus on new updates. As already covered, this would take a fraction of the time as coding a new update does. As I said, with choice 2, if a large chunk of players really want more choice, and it's not prohibitively difficult to develop this choice, then it should be developed. 7. The slippery slope argument. If you add the combat switching game rule, this just opens the floodgates to thousands of players demanding what they want, which is bad. I understand that you can't add infinitely many new features, because they take time to brainstorm, design, code, test, etc. But this would just be one new feature. The thing is, Mojang already gets a ludicrous number of feature requests. Just look at r/Minecraft suggestions. And guess what? They reject 99.999% of them. Mojang is not obligated to accept every suggestion. In fact, its job is to decide what the best ones are. So that's nearly it. Now I'll just cover a few miscellaneous things that didn't find themselves elsewhere in the video. What should the default combat version actually be? I said in this video and the previous one that the default version would be the aptly named New Combat, but now that I think about it more, I'm not sure. One of the reasons Jeb wanted to create a new system was to simplify the gameplay experience for beginners, in turn keeping that Minecraft feel. The thing is, the base interactions of New Combat are more complicated than 1.8. In 1.8, the system difficulty scales up nicely. Even though advanced players use more complex strategies like strafing and S-tapping, the core mechanic is literally click to attack, which new players can understand easily. Contrast that to New Combat, where new players have to immediately understand different weapon reaches, special charged attacks, and shields. It's less intuitive. Even 1.16 is arguably simpler for beginners, whereas 1.16 players only need to worry about attack cooldown and the food saturation regeneration mechanic. New Combat players need to worry about attack reach, special attacks, and hits cutting off eating food. This one's a closer comparison though. This immediate complexity is probably a bad thing for new players, most of whom still want an initially simpler system. So should the default system be 1.8 instead of New Combat? I think if it is, Mojang would have to add some sort of auto-clicker feature for 1.8, which would be very controversial, because honestly, I do not think like an abundance of people getting RSI is a good thing. And considering the system will have further balancing, I think it probably is best that New Combat is the default. What about Bedrock? With Bedrock Edition, everything is a bit different. It currently has a system similar to 1.8.9 Combat, but it's way more unbalanced. as armor protection and enchantment values were changed in 1.9 to fit Java Edition's new combat, not Bedrock Edition's combat. The reason combat was not changed to match Java Edition's on Bedrock Edition was that Mojang thought it would be too difficult to use on consoles, and especially phones and tablets where trying to time an attack cooldown would be very difficult. This would seem to further complicate the situation, but in fact it's not that bad. On Bedrock Edition, Mojang could just implement the same game rule solution, or they might not need to depending on how much Bedrock players care about this. Perhaps Mojang could reach out to the Bedrock community to ask their opinions on this. Personally though, I'm all for Bedrock players having way more choice than they currently do. Okay, I really do want to make a separate video on this now, stay tuned for that I guess. What I do like though, generally, is that Jeb actively reached out to the community on Reddit to get their feedback, and then iterated upon it consecutively, with combat snapshot after combat snapshot. Jeb is certainly open to new suggestions, so if you do like my ideas, then tell him on Reddit and share this video. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like, and watch my other videos. This has been Medicore. Bye.